Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Real Talk. We're in section 98 through 101, Be Still and Know That I Am God, which is one of the greatest scriptural phrases of all time.
And we might not talk about it a lot.
We might not. No, it's so good, but it's also one of those that it's like, you know.
A lot of people may be conversing about that
you'll probably,
other shows.
You'll naturally talk about that.
Exactly.
So this is one of those areas, when you get into the mid-90s through the section numbers, the mid-90s through like the...
Not the style of hair
Not the
and
style.
music.
Yeah, exactly. Through when you start and go into the 100s, this is very context heavy, and so we need to understand the context here. And so what I would tell you is, if you haven't read out of Saints for a while, do some story time this week. I brought it with me just so that, you know, I can reintroduce you to this beauty. In here, this is going to be pages 191 through 193. Is where it's 2 chapters, they're shorter chapters, and it's also on your phone, so you can hit play and listen to it.
Yeah.
So those of you who spend a lot of time in cars or you go on bike rides or runs, listen to the details of what's going on, where these revelations emerge from.
So you have context.
So let me give you some of the highlights. It's not all in here, it's very interesting to me. They're very important church history stories. So for example, the saints are preaching to the Native Americans. Which is very politically taboo at the time, especially as they move into Missouri. They're also preaching the vision of Section 76, the 3 kingdoms of glory and the vision of the adversary and so on.
Which we talked about how Brigham Young didn't
Brigham Young was
love
even,
that.
Yeah, he's like, no. And so that was ruffling feathers. But one of the biggest issues at this point in church history is slave ownership. And so most of the members of the church are from the New England area, the northeast American communities. And so those were not slave states. So they're moving into Missouri, which is a pro-slave state and has been for decades. And so as they come in, it's creating major political tension between this huge group that's increasing by the thousands in Missouri, or over 1,000, and for the most part, they're teaching and baptizing, and so it's really created quite a political stir in Missouri. And so William Phelps, he is a prolific writer. He writes in the Evening and Morning Star and was one of the main people that wrote for the church to get communication out. He saw this happening, and so he's encouraging incoming saints to pay off debts so that they weren't a burden on the community, to ease some of these tensions with the Missourians. And then he vaguely wrote this statement. He wrote, "So long as we have no special rule in the church as to people of color, let prudence guide." And that's in the Saints book, this story is. And so it's kind of this vague, like, maybe yes, maybe no, let's just let prudence guide. And so, but Missouri was furious. Mm-hmm. The local Missourians were not happy. It triggered them. Big time. And so this really, there's already friction, and it just makes it significantly worse. And so he's worried about that. And so soon after, he writes to clarify in the Evening and Morning Star, and he writes...
in today's terms, it would be a tweet that reads pulled down and then a press release tweeted again.
Yeah, and then he even makes it worse. Because he says, we are opposed to having free people of color admitted into the state. We say that none will be admitted into the church, which completely misrepresented the church's stance on baptizing black members of the church. That is not what the church's stance was. And so he was hoping it would prevent future violence, but it didn't. This is when the printing press gets ruined, gets burned, the whole building gets burned.
We talked about it last week.
Yeah, and all of that. That's what led to Edward Partridge and Charles Allen getting tarred and feathered. And so that's what's going on. And so as you go into these sections, this is the question I like to ask. How can we handle extreme conflict? This isn't just like, I'm mad at my family. This is like really, really extreme conflict, going almost to life and death. How can we handle extreme conflict while limiting the damage? What can we do to limit some of that damage? Because they're in a situation where they're not going to avoid all of it, but how can we limit it as much as possible?
It brings to mind, we just had a state conference that was amazing about making room in the inn from Elder Gong's talk.
Oh my goodness.
One of the best.
Zion.
Right, Zion.
Yes.
And our stake president was pretty bold about, and I don't want to compare a very sensitive issue like slavery
Yeah.
with what we're currently going through in various areas of the world.
Very
with
different.
the pandemic. But we can see within our worship circles and our congregations where there is great division and conflict over masks, the pandemic, how policy is, meeting together, not meeting together. And I think it's a really helpful week to have a conversation.
Where it's getting to the point where
Yeah.
it's like, man, we're at the point maybe we need to limit the damage because there's so much that's already been
done. And our
done.
stake president did say, like, we're hearing too many reports of political conflict that is interrupting worship services or relationships in congregations. So that's really helpful. So section 98, let's start with the first few verses.
Oh, why not? We never do that.
Because I never do that. I'm so predictable. Verily I say unto you, my friends, fear not, let your hearts be comforted. Yea, rejoice evermore, and in everything give thanks, which I think, based on what you just shared, you can see why the Lord's leading out with that, right?
Yeah.
Waiting.
That's actually really great. Where do you start?
Where do you start?
Where do you start in your mindset as you approach people and these really hot topics?
To not fear, to let your heart be comforted, and to rejoice, code word, express gratitude evermore.
Yeah, and give thanks. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I like that.
So then, as we go through these first few verses, verse 2 says, wait patiently on the Lord, for your prayers have entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabbath. And are
It's
being
Sabaoth.
seen. Oh,
It's
Sabaoth.
different.
It is Sabaoth. Tell
Yeah.
us the difference between
The
Sabbath and Sabaoth.
It's more Sabaoth is more the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies.
Which is helpful when they are being tarred and feathered in their printing press.
He's making sure that they understand that he's with them in their battles.
He's not all skip to my loo.
Yeah, sometimes, a lot of the times the Lord is very loving, wrap his arms around, a lot of times, but he's also can be very,
Warring.
a Lord of Sabaoth as an army captain.
Right, thank you for that. And then verse 3, where I kind of want to settle for a minute, is, therefore he giveth this promise unto you with an immutable covenant, that they shall be fulfilled, and all things wherewith ye have been afflicted shall work together for your good, and in my name's glory, saith the Lord. And so for me, I have a new little booklet out. When you let God prevail, his promises are sure. And I feel like verse 3 literally is saying that.
Immutable covenant.
And an immutable covenant
Not
is
just a covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's saying God is really going to keep his promises. And in the book, I talk about how waiting patiently upon the Lord, knowing that your prayers have entered, even though maybe what's showing up isn't signaling to you that he heard your prayers and they're going to be answered, because he has given you a promise. And verse 3 is that promise. And so what afflictions have really been for your good, because they have fostered verses 1 through 3 in this section in you, where you've learned more maybe gratitude. You've learned to let God prevail. You've learned to have peace in your heart even when there's warring going on. And I think, I could give you a list. I share some in the booklet, but I would love to hear your thoughts on how you have tried to take those afflictions in your life, and you've been really open on Real Talk about some areas of your life where it has been an affliction and it's ongoing.
I'm trying to think, because obviously for me, and I didn't realize this for the first half of my life, was obviously with mental illness. That's always been it's where Christ has met me. I just didn't realize it. I thought it was ugly and he would never meet me there.
Right.
But that's exactly where he met me, was in that darkness. And so I see that as working together for my good, which doesn't make it great, but it makes it manageable. I think about just family dynamics in general. I think about I was talking to my dad this morning. I like to talk to him before we film. There's something about his testimony, his love, his light that just really fills me with confidence.
And he's a super fan.
Yeah, and he's just so great. He just thinks, he is, as all dad, he's just such a great, he thinks I'm awesome, which is great. My mom and her personality and dynamic have really blessed me. And my brother, my younger brother, and my two older sisters, and we all struggle with different forms of mental health and anxiety and different issues and all of that. And I think when I was younger, I looked at those as bad. And now that I look at those, I look back and say, I am such I can parent my kids or mentor my kids in very useful ways because of and I'm not even saying any of it's bad, what I grew up in a very loving home. And so anyway, I'm just thinking about things that maybe we think, we're so annoyed with, but that the Lord's like, no, those are the very things that work together for your good. It's the reason you came down to earth, is to learn from your experience. You need to deal with difference, diversity, friction, uncertainty in relationships. You just have to do it. And I will promise to work it together.
Right, because that law of opposition, that pressing forward, there is a built-in factor in that, even though it doesn't feel fun.
Yeah,
it develops.
hurts.
I can look back and see where characteristics in me have been fostered, parts of my personality, the way I see the world. You've shared more empathy. Those are just examples, so thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I would say those are the very points is which, unfortunately, and we'll talk about this in an episode coming up, just how it's the Lord will almost, like Abraham, put you in situations where you really have to grapple with some of the hardest things that some of us will ever experience.
I think we are going to talk about it this week, actually. Section 101.
Oh yeah, that's in 101.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, let's.
So do you want to say anything about Section 99?
Well, it's just a shout out to John Murdock. John Murdock is so fun. I bring up John Murdock to you, and I'm like, hey, I want to talk about John Murdock. And you made I don't even remember what sound you made. I've never heard it, and I didn't realize I was talking to a John Murdock fan.
Super fan.
Super fan. So I was like, never mind. Apparently, I'm late to the game.
He has more of a story than just what we know maybe initially. And maybe anyone that's dealt with infertility will understand why, to me, it's such a tender experience that he gave his children to Joseph and Emma after they had experienced such a loss. And so, I mean, from then on, but he eventually is a patriarch in Lehigh, which is where we both live.
That's right. We both live in Lehigh, and he was there.
Shout out to Lehigh,
for 13 years.
Yeah, and then ended up in Beaver, where there's good cinnamon rolls and cheese curds.
Beaver, Utah, on your road trips.
On your road trips, if you're on the I-15. Yeah. So I think he's worth looking, because I think he's one of countless examples of that pressing forward, affliction, what we talked about last week, where things show up on the scene of your life and you're like, wait, no, I didn't know that was going to happen. He went through a divorce. A lot of fun facts. Yeah,
and he went on 3 missions, and one of the things I want to point out about 2 of those missions, and then we can get into section 101 or 100 and then 101, is just simply he left on one of those missions soon after, or he left on one of those missions with his first one with Hiram Smith in section 52 verses 8 and 9 is the commandment. And then when he comes back, he realizes that the twins that he had allowed Joseph and Emma to adopt, the boy had passed away. Because of the effects of the mob attacking Joseph and tarring and feathering him. And so that's tragic. That really hits him hard. But I want to skip, he also serves a mission in Australia.
Shout out to Australia.
Yeah, from 1851 to 1852. And I'm sure the Australian saints know more about this than I do. But all I'll say is John Murdock was plagued with sickness. And he ends up coming home from Australia sooner than he would like to. He petitions Brigham Young and says, I don't have resources, and I'm really not feeling well. And he ends up coming home for those reasons. And Brigham says, you've done your service. We'll send others to build on the foundation you created. And it's just one of those additional little insights as to some of our COVID missionaries and other missionaries who come home because of physical illness, mental illness, and other things, that a 4-month mission may be what you can do.
We were just talking about that with someone that you know, that offering is sufficient.
Someone that I met talking about the faith for him to serve 4 months was excruciating. And those 4 months is all he could give. And just to look him in the eye and say, it's great.
It's enough.
And then let others build on that instead.
Well, I appreciate that. A little John Murdock.
Murdock.
Down through
should have done
history.
a lot of John Murdock, but that's all right.
Section 100, verse 5. Therefore, verily I say unto you, lift up your voices unto this people. Speak the thoughts that I shall put into your hearts, and ye shall not be confounded before men. For verse 6 is what I've relied on in so many situations, including on camera for this show. For it shall be given you in the very hour. I didn't say that well. It wasn't really given to me very well in that moment, but the very moment what you shall say. And I would say on Real Talk, we try to pull the curtain back a little and let you see that process for us, that sometimes we are led to go in a different direction. As a speaker, I've given at this point, I think nearly...
Wait, can I guess?
Go ahead. I probably have...
10,000.
No.
Dang, I was going high. 5,000.
I'm probably approaching 1,800 keynotes in the last.
Keynotes? Oh, I was thinking all your speaking things.
Yeah. So probably in the last few years, I can give you so many situations where I've tried to fill up the well and then put the notes aside and let the Lord have that process dance with me. But I would say even more than anything, we read these verses and we think specifically on missionaries, and that's great, especially for missionaries that are out there right now thinking, I don't even know how I feel about the scriptures or what I understand about the gospel, so how am I supposed to talk about it? I don't want to take away from that. But if you've had a teenager that is wanting to talk to you at 11:30 at night, because that's when they like to talk.
Yeah, that's when they want to talk.
And they're finally talking to you about what's on their hearts, and you're not sure what to say, I think this is where this promise is so important to recall and remember in that moment, that the Lord is so mindful of not being confounded in the times we need it. My husband and I just spoke in church, and traditionally he is really over-prepared for talks. And I was so proud of him because he said right before we left for church, I'm going to do it different this time. I'm going to not over-prepare, and I'm going to let the Lord lead. And he was humble, and he was vulnerable. And the feedback, especially from other men in the ward, to see this 53-year-old man talk about his own wrestles and struggles where afflictions have been for our good. And he talked about it so openly, and it wasn't so scripted. And I'm not trying to take away from those that maybe need to write things out or follow an outline more. But I was really aware as I'm watching in real time, because I do this full time and he doesn't do it full time, that he really let the Lord drive and he let the Spirit direct, and the words were given when he needed them.
Well, and I appreciate that. Going back to what we talked about to begin last week's episode, it's a spiritual creation, right? When we create talks, there's a spiritual format, and sometimes that spiritual creation, it's to prepare the heart. So, speaking of this, I did want to just read this story out of my book, but I decided not to. I decided I should probably just give it. But in my book, Come Follow Me Through the Doctrine and Covenants, it's on pages 124 and 125. When we were going through a particularly difficult struggle, we decided we were living in San Diego, and we moved to Utah. This isn't a dig at anything. It's just we didn't want to move, but we had to move. And so I lined up a job. My wife was 7 months pregnant, and we drove to Utah. And I needed to finish school and some other things for financial reasons. And so we moved back up to Utah. And as I'm pulling in to Salt Lake County in the moving truck, I get a phone call from my boss who gave me this new job, and he called and told me that position no longer exists. So I'm driving into Salt Lake County, and just kind of driving in like, she's 7 months pregnant with our second kid, and I don't have a job, and I don't know how this is going to work. So it was really tough. It was brutal for a few months, and so that was in October of 2007. And so as we go into those months, for whatever reason, Paige just latched onto this new, in 2000, I even looked up the release date, October 9th, 2007, Josh Groban released his Christmas album, Noel.
I have it, and I love it.
Everyone has it.
Yeah.
So he releases this, and for whatever reason, she just, in that state, that music was the hope she needed. It just calmed her. It really helped her. And so, but CDs, when we were buying CDs, it's $15. $15 was half my gas budget, if not my full gas budget for a month.
Wow.
And so it kind of got to this point where I just joke about it. I'm like, gas or Groban? What are we going to choose? And we chose gas because I needed to get to work and school. Anyway, so we chose gas. And so my daughter was born December 21st. We brought her home on Christmas Eve, my little Naomi. Anyway, but just before she was born, a lady in our ward who we didn't know, we really weren't making friends at all because we didn't have the space for it. A lady in our ward that was her visiting teacher showed up, and she just had some little gifts and stuff. She's like, I heard you're gonna have a baby, or you just had a baby, and so on. And then she hands my wife this thing, and it's like slow motion. I'm like, is that what I think it is? And sure enough, it's that Josh Groban CD. And she goes, I've loved this CD. I was in the store the other day, and I just looked at it and thought, someone needs this. So here you go. And we're just melted us. we just were bawling. We're like, you have no idea. I don't think that anyone's ever had that reaction from getting a CD from a stranger. We're just bawling, and it just meant so much to us. And so the reason why I bring this up is when you get to verse 6, for it shall be given you in the very hour, yea, in the very moment, what ye shall say. That is a great place to start, but don't end that sentence. Don't limit this sentence or this promise, because it can be given you in the very moment what ye shall ask. As a professional teacher, some of the most inspiring things that have ever happened in my class are not anything I say, but they're questions that I ask students in the moment that bring out these crazy, interesting spiritual experiences. It can even be something as simple as, will you tell me more about that? I'm interested. Why did you say it that way? So it can be...
Which is, to pause, a great phrase. I asked you about like those conversations with our teenagers late at night that feel awkward. I asked you, because you're so brilliant at this, what do you do to get your kids to keep talking?
Will you tell my kids that?
I just did.
Yeah, thanks.
Naomi, Luke, and Max.
Yeah.
And Ganel-Lyn says, your dad is brilliant at this.
They'll listen to you.
Yeah. But you shared with me that phrase. So say that one more time.
Yeah, so it shall be given you in the very moment what ye shall ask. And that's really useful when you're counseling.
So when you
like
say,
in a
tell
ward
me
council.
more.
Yeah, so bishops, in your next ward council, maybe that's something where you feel like you're talk heavy. Stop worrying so much about what you're gonna say and think more about what can I ask to draw out the correct counsel from this. Like this, when I discovered this, I was like, oh my gosh, for me, the Spirit just lit my soul on fire with this. It could be something like who ye shall hug, which reminded me of you because you're such a hugger. It can inspire you who to wrap your arms around. I always tell students in high school, it can prompt you, who shall ye say hi to in the halls, or ask the name of someone that sits next to you.
So something to do, ask, or say.
Or in very simple terms, or in very specific terms, I meant to say, that what ye shall give a random family you've never met a Josh Groban CD for Christmas, which is what happened to us.
I told you that story is going to go down in history as the top real talk stories. We have a list
Groban.
growing at the Subway sandwich one, and I've exposed some of my own stuff, so you know.
Yeah.
Okay, in finishing up, section 101.
I got long-winded.
It's okay, it's fine.
It's fun stuff with 101.
It's really good, and I don't want to...
Maybe I'll post it.
I don't want to brush over this too quickly, but I think verse 4 for me is a principle that I've been pondering on, and in our interview with Stephen Harper, he also testified of his testimony around this.
Yeah.
And in verse 4 it says, therefore they must needs be chastened and tried, even as Abraham, who was commanded to offer up his only son. And when we were talking with Stephen Harper, he talked about loving the God of the Old Testament, the Abrahamic God, right?
Yeah, can I believe?
Can I believe and trust in the God that asks you to do something as hard as sacrifice your own son? And a little bit of a backstory here, and I've pondered on this principle for probably the last decade, that Abraham had a situation at home where he had a father that had gone a little off the rails and had tried to sacrifice him. So think about that. If you are asked to do the thing that is the trauma, and I can feel from our viewers and my own trauma, sometimes it feels like God is asking too much. It's too hard. And he asked Abraham to go right back up the same path of trauma by then sacrificing Isaac. But what God knew, and what Stephen Harper testified, and what I will testify of, is that I believe God asks us to go back through our traumas so we can unclog that trauma. So as Abraham is hiking up this mountain with his son, I am sure the PTSD was flooding his soul.
Yeah.
And he's thinking, what? I knew my father was not living the priesthood order that God intended, and now God is asking me to do this. And then we know that he has provided a bullock in the brush and is allowed to come down the mountain, I believe, more healed. Yeah. From that trauma. And so I guess my invitation is to consider that.
No, I was just saying how healing that would be to Abraham to be able to, I didn't think about that as unclogging trauma.
Unclogging
Sorry,
trauma.
I know you're explaining that and I'm trying to experience that.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful principle.
So sometimes when I think we get a calling or a reassignment or a loss in our life, it is often bringing up our childhood trauma or a trauma that the Lord's like, I don't want you caught there. I want you unclogged. So that's my thought on verse 4 this week, to consider Abraham. Do you have any other thoughts on that before we go on?
All I was going to say is, should we go ahead and finish up?
Yeah,
with
but
our-
I wanted to give you any last additional.
Oh, I have all sorts of goofy stuff to say about
You don't
Section
wanna
101.
say-
No, we'll go. I'll post some things in there that'll be just in our notes section in here that we can have some fun with.
Okay.
But it's just I find it interesting. There's a little section in 101 that says this is what the millennium will be like. It says in that day. I believe the verses are somewhere in like 22 to 32 ish, and so it's interesting.
They are.
Interesting to revisit and say in that day what's actually gonna be the case. What kind of a lifestyle is it gonna be in that day? And so it's interesting in there.
And
Well,
Sweet Max asked some questions about that.
well, yeah, my little Max. I'll just share one. So there's one thing in there that talks about the enmity between man and the enmity between man and beast or animal will be gone. And so my son just the other day walked into a room and we were just doing house stuff. We were just at home, and all he just says, he goes, I can't wait for Jesus to come back to earth so we can ride cheetahs. So that's how he interpreted it. So I think he's kind of doctrinally correct. I don't know if the cheetahs want to be ridden, but nevertheless, he's understanding the enmity between man and beast will be gone during the millennium.
Awesome.
So anyway.
Well, our invitation this week is to go back to that idea of the Lord giving you the words in that moment, but maybe he is going to give you a question to ask or an action, like with the CD gift.
Yeah.
What interactions, questions, or actions can the Lord give you in the moment that you need this week? We would love to see on social media what you feel prompted to say, do, or ask. And we invite you to join us again next week for another episode of Real Talk, Come Follow Me.
You guys, please like and subscribe and click the bell.
Like and subscribe.
What did I say?
You did it. It was
Like and
perfect.
subscribe
That was so perfect.
and click the bell. Just do it.